Welcome to this special London Philharmonic online pre-concert talk. I've done a lot of these kind of chats just directly to camera and I bored myself. So I'm so happy to be joined by three of my wonderful colleagues, Sue Böhling, Andy Barclay and Johnny Ryan. Thanks for joining us. And we hope you enjoy this insight into the concert and what the orchestral life of the LPO is. You can listen to the concert we would have performed this evening using the links below, and keep in touch with us on social media using the hashtag #LPOnline. So when we put together this program, which we should have been doing tonight, and I'm so sad we're not, I put together three of my favorite composers, and on paper nothing really connects them: Sibelius, Janáček, and the Lutoslawski. But there's something about those three composers in this country, in the UK, which seem to chime. And I think it's something about, there's a connection. Let's take Sibelius. There's a connection between him, coming from Finland, and performances in the UK. And there has been ever since the pieces were written. And if you go back to Beecham and Barbaroli, and I think as a UK, we're attracted to those composers that come from these singular musical traditions like ours. You know, when you think about Szymanowski and Lutoslawski in Poland, Janáček back to Dvorak in the Czech Republic and Czechoslovakia, and Sibelius in Finland. And there's something about the music which seems to chime both with orchestras in the UK and the audiences as well. And Sibelius, I think, is a particular composer which the LPO have done an awful lot of the music of. There was a big cycle, wasn't there, recently in the festival hall. And talking to Johnny, I think his horn writing is something unique, isn't it? That sunlit, glooming sound that he manages to get.
And his phrasing isn't your usual horn phrasing, the intervals, etc., that he uses. It is, I don't know whether it comes from the organ sort of stuff that he had going on at the time, or the learning that he had with the organ, but the harmonies in the horn section. Sibelius is a really wonderful composer for us as a section to play, because you all have your own individual bits. There are bits where you grow out of the section and you play within the section as a harmony. You actually, again, linking up with his background, you play as a choir, almost just the four of you. It's something that I've often found is good to bring in and get students to play, because that, like Brahms or Dvorak too, you have four distinctive parts. So it's easy to get people to play together and learn how to play together in a section from a learning point of view. Going back to, his horn tunes, his horn writing is exciting. You think to Sibelius 5 as well, where there are many occasions in Sibelius music where the hair goes up on the back of my neck because of something that the section is playing. And I personally love it because it develops your sense of line very, very well. There's a latent sort of tension to a huge number of phrases that he writes, that's sort of very gratifying to explore. So, you know, there's a tune about 9 minutes in or 10 minutes in that the horns play, and then there's another tune that the first horn plays with the trumpet, where you can really let rip and really go. And there's also, you've been probably quite disciplined with all the harmonic stuff that's been going on before that. So you get the best of both worlds, really, with Sibelius.
It's incredibly active writing, isn't it? And not in this piece too, but traditionally he's wonderful. He writes so wonderfully for the Corange.
Yeah, beautiful, absolutely beautiful. I mean, I really like this piece. We've played this quite a lot actually, and I think my little core entry marks the entrance of the wizard in this wonderful tale. I just think that the piece is so perfectly told. It's incredibly narrative. There's a beginning, you can see it builds up and builds up, and I just think it's a perfect form. And
yeah, and the journey of it is there are some colours in it I find that he doesn't
really lovely.
use elsewhere. If you think of that, when this cackling of the gods towards the end, which apocryphally is meant to be the music that Herrmann used for the Psycho shower scene. I mean, it's extraordinary. It's advanced and ahead of its time. And Sibelius, the other thing I'd say about Sibelius, these three composers in the program, is it's often as if they write as if the manuscript paper, these 5 lines that we all have to compute all the time, are just a slight inconvenience. And actually, their music speaks much more clearly from sound to audience than those lines can ever give. When you're playing Janáček, go on, Johnny, you're going to say something.
No, I was just going to say, do you think that comes from the fact that they are all 3 composers are quite well grounded in their own national idiom, whether that's folk music or not, or whether it's tradition of learning and composition, and the inspirations that they draw on are often folk tales, are often very visual in a way. I find it's very easy for me to have a visual image or the feeling of it, something almost filmic, about these 3 composers.
I think that's right. Nationalism, the folk music, and not feeling bound, not feeling restrained by this classical world that we're in. And the first composer that who I love conducting his music of is in this context is Berlioz, who you really, I mean, how he ever put half his music down on manuscript paper is a total mystery to me. And in Janáček, I mean, the spelling of the music, whether it's in C-sharp minor or D-flat minor, seems to be completely arbitrary. And he absolutely has his own rules. And I think that energy of music making, of composition, really comes across. And I remember the first time, a question I was asked the first time I heard the Glagolitic Mass was, as a kid on a record. And I had no idea that a formalized mass could have that impact as music. It really was a complete revelation to me, and I've been in love with his music ever since. On to Lutoslawski. So this concerto for orchestra, you can hear lots of Bartók's concerto for orchestra as the kind of model of the piece, can't you? Although it comes from a very different musical tradition, also Slavic, also folk inflected. But people ask me what I love about Lutoslawski's music, and this is fairly early in his range of music, and I think it has a playfulness about the sounds he made, about the chordal structures that seem to wink at you and wink off the page. And this piece is very playful in that way. The opening movement's written aggressivo for the strings, and I think that's the darkest the piece gets. And there's a kind of there are echoes of wartime in that, but after that it brightens and it lightens, it seems to me, right the way through the piece. And Sue, there's that gorgeous cor anglais solo that starts off the Passacaglia, which I adore and wish we were performing together tonight.
No, it's lovely. Excuse me. Yeah, it's a nice little a snippet in the middle of this huge orchestral machine. I was just thinking it's such an enormous program for a huge orchestra in the Janáček and the Lutoslawski, and I'm really quite a small cog in this program tonight, but every now and then you get this little moment when it's just you, and it's really intricate actually with the fives and what have you. It's an interesting one, that. Yeah, you have to just stay
I find you're right. The piece is huge. The orchestra is pretty huge. Andy, we'll come on to your percussion section because it's very specifically written, but you always notice if someone misses an entry in any part of the orchestra. It's written with such finesse and character that there's nothing redundant. It has a leanness about it within this huge texture. It's a big section for you, isn't it, Andy, the Lutoslawski?
Yeah, I think we would have had about 5, I think it's 5 percussion and a timpanist. I just find the whole piece, the opening is, I think it's one of the great openings of anything, the drama of it, and there's a pounding of the timps at the beginning, and it's a bit like a sort of kind of Brahms one, but in a much more sort of dark situation. And we recently played the 3rd Symphony, which is later, and it's more aleatoric, and it's maybe a more difficult piece to come to grips with. But this, I find this concerto for orchestra as a sort of gloriously symphonic sort of masterpiece, really. And the scherzo, especially the use of at one point he uses lots of different size snare drums. You hear these rolls that go up and down like on a ladder almost. It's very cleverly written, and I just find it a really effective piece. I'm just surprised we don't do it more often, actually.
I'm amazed at how translucent the writing is. You know, for such a huge orchestra and such, you know, at times it's just mammoth, and then all of a sudden it's just this. You can, as you said, no voice is redundant, and you can pick up these little nifty little woodwind bits, and I think it's extraordinary. We should do it more.
It is. He has a fingerprint for me. It couldn't be anyone else from his own nation or elsewhere. Even though, you know, the form of it is so influenced by the Bartok. That bit you're talking about, Andy, I've spent hours balancing and tuning up and down at the end of the second movement. No, I don't know any other bit of music that goes on like that, like a yo-yo up and down, just pulsing away until the double basses stop you.
I mean, it would be ideal if it could be played by one player, but it can't. So you have to sound like one player with a kind of almost as if you're playing a drum and somebody's tightening the head up as you're playing it. But
that's lovely. But,
so you have to make it sound.
It's you talked a little bit about the style of it and why we don't play it more often. My real honest opinion of the piece is it's a fantastic showpiece for an orchestra, and it gives you everything. It gives you the drama you're talking about at the beginning of the first movement, this warlike cry, through to the glory of the end. But I think the Bartok has the elegy in the middle of it, that third movement, which is so exquisite and dark and searching. And I think the Lutoslawski never goes that far. But I do think in his later pieces, I adore the third and fourth symphonies, and we're going to play at the beginning of the autumn the Espace du Sommeil, the Spaces of Sleep, with Jerry Finley, which is also aleatory, all the instrumentalists playing freely against and with each other. And that, for me, that's his great voice. And there's something about those pieces where the whole orchestra plays melodically, but soloistically and individually and free, that creates a totally different sound universe, doesn't it? Because everyone is making individually, it's kind of the greatest example of democracy in music, that everyone is individually making the most beautiful shaped phrase melodic sound they possibly can. And that's what first intoxicated me about his music.
I first heard the Glagolitic Mass because it was on the opposite. I had a disc or a vinyl, probably a record, I'm so old. Because when I was younger, I used to sing a lot. I used to sing in a church choir and a few other things. And we sang the Poulenc Gloria when I was a bit younger, and I loved it so much that eventually I bought a record of it when I had the money. And on the back was a Glagolitic Mass. So one day I turned this record over and listened to this, and I'd never heard anything like it before. And I always think, everybody says that Janáček's the one composer who couldn't actually be anybody else.
It's true, yeah.
And what I always noticed, because funnily enough with Janáček, he doesn't write masses for percussion. He writes the most unbelievable timpani parts. I mean, the timpani part in the Glagolitic Mass is one of the great things. And, you know, we can't hear Simon play it because he plays it better than anyone. But when we listen, because we do a lot of Janáček at Glyndebourne, you know, we've done Vixen and Katya and all those sort of things. When you hear it being rehearsed, sometimes it sounds awful because some of the things the strings have to play, they're not sometimes it feels like they're just sounds. They're not necessarily phrases, they're little sounds. And it's only when they're all bolted together and everybody sort of sits back into it, you hear this sweep of music. But the individual things sometimes are really hard to play. And
you'd wonder how he thought of orchestrating what he heard in his head.
There's one bit in the Glagolitic Mass where the strings sort of play a close chord and it sort of keeps pulsing forwards, and it sounds like somebody leaning on a squeeze box.
It's true. Yeah. Yes, that's right.
Like that.
And
I just thought, how do you think of that? And B, how do you sit down and think, right, how do I write that for strings? And it's extraordinary. I think
It's true, and you're right. The first rehearsals of these pieces are often quite difficult, even with the great orchestras of the world, especially with the strings. Our wonderful viola section will be very relaxed at home tonight, because the bits in the Slava, the Gloria, where they have to play over and over again, further and further up, are close to impossible. But he just pushes, doesn't he? Like Beethoven, like Berlioz, he pushes for the absolute essence of what he wants to get from an orchestra, and I love him for that, although there have been some painful rehearsals in my life of his music, but the result is always glorious. And the Glagolitic Mass, I think, is one of the great, he was very conflicted himself about religion, but it's one of the great pieces of community between a chorus and an orchestra that I know exists.
I quite like Janáček for the fact that every single fourth horn part that's ever written by Janáček has about 5 notes in it, or 6 notes in it, because he used to take him out boozing before the gigs.
Is that the reason? Okay, I've really learned something today. Is that true?
He was very good friends with the fourth horn in the orchestra that he was in. I can't remember where it is, Borden or something. And he said, and they used to go out before concerts or whenever, but he just needed to know that he had somebody to go and have a drink with, and B, that person was still going to be able to play what he'd written for him later on. So the fourth horn part is really woefully underused when you hear how much he writes and how well he writes for the other 3.
Mate,
in that case, I ruined one of your colleagues' evenings, because I make in the Sinfonietta I make the fourth horn double everything. It's always A4. I've never quite understood that. That's interesting, but I'm still going to make them play.
I was just going to say, it's just a shame. It's a shame that we're not getting together to play this program. Really, it's a fantastic workout for the orchestra as a whole. I mean, everybody would have had a busy night.
I was so looking forward to seeing you all, and they're 3 of my favorite pieces, and it would have been such a pleasure. But we'll reprogram them. We'll put them in when we can over the next seasons, and we've got plenty more treats coming up in the autumn. Brilliant. So stay well, everyone.
Yes,
it's great to chat with you all,
and
see you soon.
And you.
All the very best.
All the best, everybody. Stay well.